Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Umbrella Rebellion's Culty Book Club. We will be reading, or I will be reading, The Body Keeps the Score tonight. So I am just going to hang out here for a few minutes and see who all is coming in. Hey, Phantom. Good to see ya. Welcome in, welcome in. Let's see. Share with some other people. How are you doing today, Phantom? Doing good. Are you working tonight? Oh, excuse me. Welcome in, all. We are doing a culty book club. Gotcha. I will be reading The Body Keeps the Score. Hello, Panda. Hi, hi. Good to see you over here. Hey, Mary, how are you? Good to see you. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes and see if anyone else is going to join us before I start getting into the book. So, before I get started, has anybody read The Body Keeps the Score? Welcome in. Welcome in. Thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. I have never read it, and I have been wanting to read it for years. And so I'm kind of glad we're doing this because I'll finally be able to read it and have somebody to talk to about it. So this is one of you're listening to The Body Keeps a Score. Oh, it's difficult. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, I want to do, these books and everything, but sometimes it can get really heavy. And I'm already doing the heavy work of going through the men's manual. So I was kind of hoping that this would be healing for us. So if it gets too much, you let me know and we can take a break from this and do something else. Either tonight or next, we can flop around a little bit every week. Because I don't want to like overwhelm people. Healing heavy. Okay. That's cool. That's cool. All righty. Okay. So I think we're going to go ahead and if I can remember which setup I wanted. I think it was a different one. Was it this one? No, that one. There we go. That's what I wanted. All right. So on YouTube, I have the book that I am putting up on the screen as I am reading it. So where's the cover? Okay, there's the cover. All right. So I think there's some prologue. Okay. So we'll start with the prologue. Facing trauma. I need to move this so I can see y'all's chat. All right. One does not have to be a combat soldier or visit a refugee camp in Syria or the Congo to encounter trauma. Trauma happens to us, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. Research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has shown that 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 was beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body, and 1 in 3 couples engage in physical aggression. I have to like change some of these words for the TikToks and the YouTube so I don't get, you know, um kicked off. So I will do my best to convey the word that I cannot say in a way that you can understand. A quarter of us grew up with drinking relatives, and 1 out of 8 witnessed their mother being struck or struck repetitively. As human beings, we belong to an extremely resilient species. Since time immemorial, we have rebounded from our relentless wars, countless disasters, both natural and man made, and the violence and betrayal in our own lives. But the traumatic experiences do leave traces, whether on a large scale or on our histories and cultures, or close to home on our families, with dark secrets being impeccably passed down through generations. They also leave traces on our mind and emotions, on our capacity for joy and intimacy, and even on our biology and immune system. Welcome in, welcome in. I am reading The Body Keeps the Score. If you would like to join in and listen and discuss, please hang out. Trauma affects not only those who are directly exposed to it, but also those around them. Soldiers returning home from combat may frighten their families with their rages and emotional absence. The wives of men who suffer from PTSD tend to become depressed, and the children of depressed mothers are at risk of growing up insecure and anxious. Having been exposed to family aggression as a child often makes it difficult to establish stable, trusting relationships as an adult. Thank you for the likes. Welcome in, welcome in. Trauma, by definition, is unbearable and intolerable. Most rape victims, combat soldiers, and children who have been violated become so upset when they think about what they experienced that they try to push it out of their minds, trying to act as if nothing happened and move on. It takes tremendous energy to keep functioning while carrying the memory of terror and the shame of utter weakness and vulnerability. That's so true, huh? While we all want to move beyond trauma, the part of our brain that is devoted to ensure our survival, deep below our rational brain, is not very good at denial. Thank you. Appreciate it. Long after a traumatic experience is over, it may be reactivated at the slightest hint of danger and mobilize disturb brain circuits and secrete massive amounts of stress hormones. That's interesting. I knew trauma could be a physiological response, but I had never like had a description of what that would be like, and I get it now. He described it in a way I could understand it. This precipitates unpleasant emotions, intense physical sensations, and impulse and aggressive actions. These post traumatic reactions feel incomprehensible and overwhelming. Feeling out of control, survivors of trauma often begin to fear that they are damaged to the core and beyond redemption. Who will never be professionals, which leads to all sorts of health issues, migraine, IBS, autoimmune. Yes, like that's, and I guess I never really understood how the correlation of trauma and the physiological response. Like, I knew it was all connected and the chronic illnesses that a lot of survivors, are dealing with and everything. I guess I never really understood, like, I guess the physiological process that can cause that, right? Well, I'm not selling a course, so I'm just reading a book and trying to learn more and heal better. So, the first time I remember being drawn to study medicine was at a summer camp when I was about 14 years old. My cousin Michael kept me up all night explaining the intricacies of how kidneys work, how they secrete the body's waste materials and then reabsorb the chemicals that keep the system in balance. I was riveted by his account of the miraculous way the body functions. He sounds autistic. At 14 is like diving into kidney function to that detail. Oh man. Later, during every stage of my medical training, whether I was studying surgery, cardiology, or pediatrics, it was obvious to me that the key to healing was understanding how the human organism works. When I began my psychiatry rotation, however, I was struck by the contrast between the incredible complexity of the mind and the ways that we human beings are connected and attached to one another and how little psychiatrists knew about the origins of the problems they were treating. That's very true as well. Would it be possible one day to know as much about brains, minds, and love as we do about the other systems that make up our organism? We are obviously still years from attaining that sort of detailed understanding, but the birth of three new branches of science has led to an explosion of knowledge about the effects of psychological trauma, abuse, and neglect. Those new disciplines are neuroscience, the study of how brain supports mental processes, developmental psychopathology, the study of the impact of adverse experiences on the development of mind and brain, and interpersonal neurobiology, the study of how our behavior influences the emotions, biology, and mindsets of those around us. Research from these new disciplines has revealed that trauma produces actual physiological changes, including a recalibration of the brain's alarm system, an increase in stress hormone activity, and accelerations in the system that filters relevant information from irrelevant. Interesting. We now know that trauma comprise compromises the brain area that communicates the physical embodied feeling of being alive. Hmm, interesting. Hello, welcome in. Where was I? These changes explain why traumatized individuals become hyper vigilant to threat at the expense of spontaneously engaging in their day to day lives. They also help us understand why traumatized people so often keep repeating the same problems and have such trouble learning from experience. Huh, interesting. We now know that their behaviors are not the result of moral failings or signs of lack of willpower or bad character. They are caused by actual changes in the brain. Huh. Hey, David, how are you? I was saying hi to you. I am reading Body Keeps the Score. I'm talking about every single person that has ever experienced trauma in their life. So, think you might fit in that category. Also, why traumatized people are more apt to be members of cults. Yes, I agree. They definitely the setup of a cult being a very high structured environment that your diary um that high structure environment as well as that um wanting to feel part of a community, um and then the promise of safety that they always give you, right? Really? You said that about things happening over there, huh? Hmm. Interesting. You have me intrigued now, David. This vast increase in our knowledge about the basic processes that underlie trauma has also opened up new possibilities to palliate or even reverse the damage. We can now develop methods and experiences that utilize the brain's own neuroplasticity to help survivors feel fully alive in the present and move on with their lives. There are fundamentally three avenues. One, top down by talking, reconnecting with others, and allowing ourselves to know and understand what is going on with us while processing the memories of trauma. Two, by taking medicines that shut down inappropriate alarm reactions or by utilizing other technologies that change the way the brain organizes information. And three, bottom up, by allowing the body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from trauma. Which one of these is best for any particular survivor is an empirical question. Most people I have worked with require a combination. And the promise of not repeating in the next, yes, in the next generation, right? If you just follow XYZ, then what happened to you will not happen to your children. Yeah, that is a big one too. Break the promise to break the cycle, right? Which they just create a different or parallel abuse cycle. Our principal mission has always been to take care of the children and adults who have come to us for treatment. But from the very beginning, we also have decided ourselves to conducting research to explore the effects of traumatic stress on different populations and to determine what treatments work for whom. We have been supported by research grants from the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, the Centers for Disease Control, and a number of private foundations to study the efficacy of most different forms of treatment, from medications to talking, yoga, EMDR, theater, and neurofeedback. The challenge is, how can people gain control over the residues of past trauma and return to being masters of their own ship? Talking, understanding, and human connections help, and drugs can dampen hyperactive alarm systems. But we will also see the imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experiences that directly contradict the helplessness, rage, and collapse that are part of trauma, and thereby regaining self mastery. I have no preferred treatment modality, as no single approach fits everybody, but I practice all the forms of treatment that I discuss in this book. Each one of them can produce profound changes, depending on the nature of the particular problem and the makeup of the individual person. I wrote this book to serve as both a guide and an invitation to dedicate ourselves to facing the reality of trauma, to explore how best to treat it, and to commit ourselves as a society to using every means we have to prevent it. Part 1: The Rediscovery of Trauma. Oh. Chapter 1: Lessons from Vietnam Veterans. I became what I am today at the age of 12 on a frigid, overcast day in the winter of 1975. That was a long time ago, but it's wrong what they say about the past. Looking back now, I realize I have been peeking into that deserted alley for the last 26 years. Kiliad Hosiani, the kite runner. Oh, there's stories in the book and I'll have to edit myself a lot. Okay. Thanks for the warning. I might have to do a key, when I see this word, say this word so I have it ready in my brain or, accessible to look at. Some people's lives seem to flow in a narrative. Mine had stops and starts. That's what trauma does. It interrupts the plot. It just happens and then life goes on. No one prepares you for it. Jessica Stern, Denial, a Memoir of Terror. That is so true. Like, how many times have I been like just stopped dead in my tracks in life because some trauma or drama or chaos is going on in my life? Like, yeah. And then it's like you feel like, okay, you're starting to get healthier, you're starting to get healing, and then bam, a new thing happened, and you're like, oh, I was going places. You get me back. I'm not ready for this. It's like a constant battle to gain ground. The Tuesday after the 4th of July weekend, 1978, was my first day as a staff psychiatrist at the Boston Veterans Administration Clinic. As I was hanging a reproduction of my favorite Brug I don't know how to pronounce this name, Bruegel painting, The Blind Leading the Blind, on the wall of my new office, I heard a commotion in the reception area down the hall. A moment later, a large, disheveled man in a stained three-piece suit carrying a copy of Soldier of Fortune magazine under his arm burst through my door. He was so agitated and so clearly hungover that I wondered how I could possibly help this hulking man. I asked him to take a seat and tell me what I could do for him. I haven't moved since the 2000s. Just all jokes aside, I call it when the shoe's gonna drop. Especially if something good. Oh, okay. Yeah. That intense feeling of, oh no, something's gonna go wrong, even when things are going right. His name was Tom. 10 years earlier, he had been in the Marines doing his service in Vietnam. He had spent the holiday weekend holed up in his downtown Boston law office, drinking and looking at old photographs rather than with his family. Right? But you do. You deserve so many good things, David. We all do. I know it's unnatural for us to feel that way, but we are worthy of good things. He knew from previous years' experience that the noise, the fireworks, the heat, and the picnic in his sister's backyard against the backdrop of dense early summer foliage, all of which reminded him of Vietnam, would drive him crazy. When he got upset, he was afraid to be around his family because he behaved like a monster with his wife and two young boys. The noise of his kids made him so agitated that he would storm out of the house to keep himself from hurting them. Only drinking himself into oblivion or riding his Harley Davidson at dangerously high speeds helped him to calm down. Nighttime offered no relief. His sleep was constantly interrupted by nightmares about an ambush in a rice paddy back in Nam, in which all the members of his platoon were unalived or wounded. He also had terrifying flashbacks in which he saw unalived Vietnamese children. The nightmares were so horrible that he dreaded falling asleep, and he often stayed up for most of the night drinking. In the morning, his wife would find him passed out in the living room on the living room couch, and she and the boys had to tiptoe around him while she made them breakfast before taking them to school. Yeah. Filling me in on his background, Tom said that he had graduated from high school in 1965, the valedictorian of his class. In line with his family tradition of military service, he enlisted in the Marine Corps immediately after graduation. His father had served in World War II in General Patton's army, and Tom never questioned his father's expectations. Athletic, intelligent, and an obvious leader, Tom felt powerful and effective after finishing basic training, a member of a team that was prepared for just about anything. In Vietnam, he quickly became a platoon leader in charge of 8 other Marines, surviving slogging through the mud, being strafed by machine pew pew fire, can leave people feeling pretty good about themselves and their comrades. Hold on, I gotta text my husband. Do 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 do. All right. At the end of his tour, Tom was honorably discharged, and all he wanted was to put Vietnam behind him. Outwardly, that's exactly what he did. He attended college on the GI Bill, um, graduated from law school, married his high school sweetheart, and had 2 sons. Tom was upset by how difficult it was to feel any affection for his wife, even though her letters had kept him alive in the madness of the jungle. Tom went through the motions of living a normal life, hoping that by faking it, he would learn to become his old self again. He now had a thriving law practice and a picture perfect family, but he sensed he wasn't normal. He felt unalive inside. Although Tom was the first veteran I have ever encountered on a professional basis, many aspects of his story were familiar to me. Oops. I grew up in a post war Holland playing in shells of a building. I know I can't say the word that caused the buildings to become unstable, if you understand what I'm saying. The son of a man who had been such an outspoken opponent of the Yazis that had been sent to an um, one of those places that you never want to go camping. My father never talked about his fighting in a military place experience. Yeah. this is this is so hard to read. TikTok friendly. Okay. But he was given to outbursts of explosive rage that stunned me as a little boy. How could the man I heard quietly going down the stairs every morning to pray and read the Bible while the rest of his family slept have such a terrifying temper? How could someone whose life was devoted to the pursuit of social justice be filled with anger? I witnessed the same puzzling behavior in my uncle, who had been captured by the Japanese in the Dutch East Indies, now in Indonesia, and sent as a indentured laborer to Burma, where he worked on a famous bridge over the River Kwai. Oh, interesting. He also rarely mentioned the fighting in group settings, and he too often erupted into uncontrollable rages. As I listened to Tom, I wondered if my uncle and my father had had nightmares and flashbacks, if they too had felt disconnected from their loved ones and unable to find any real pleasure in their lives. Somewhere in the back of my mind, there must also have been my memories of my frightened and often frightening mother, whose own childhood trauma was sometimes alluded to and I now believe was frequently reenacted. She had the unnerving habit of fainting when I asked her what her life was like as a little girl and then blaming me for making her so upset. Wow, that is an intense reaction to trauma. Reassured by my obvious interest, Tom settled down to tell me just how scared and confused he was. He was afraid that he was becoming just like his father, who was always angry and rarely talked with his children, except to compare them unfavorably with his comrades who had lost their lives around Christmas 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. As the session was drawing to a close, I did what doctors typically do. I focused on the one part of Tom's story that I thought I understood: his nightmares. As a medical student, I had worked in a sleep laboratory observing people's sleep dream cycles and had assisted in writing some articles about nightmares. I had also participated in some early research on the beneficial effects of psychoactive medication that were just coming into use in the 1970s. So while I lacked true grasp of the scope of Tom's problems, the nightmares were something I could relate to. And as an I don't know why I couldn't read that word for a second, enthusiastic believer in better living through chemistry, I prescribed a drug we had found to be effective in reducing the incidence and severity of nightmares. I scheduled Tom for a follow up visit 2 weeks later. When he returned for his appointment, I eagerly asked Tom how the medications had worked. He told me he hadn't taken any of the pills. Trying to conceal my irritation, I asked him why. I realized that if I take the pills and the nightmares go away, he replied, I will have abandoned my friends and their deaths will have been in vain. I need to be a living memorial to my friends who unalived in Vietnam. Oof, that's heavy. I was stunned. Tom's loyalty to the unalived was keeping him from living his own life, just as his father's devotion to his friends had kept him from living. Both fathers and sons' experiences on the battlefield had rendered the rest of their lives irrelevant. How had that happened? And what could we do about it? That morning, I realized I would probably spend the rest of my professional life trying to unravel the mysteries of trauma. How do horrific experiences cause people to become hopelessly stuck in the past? What happens in people's minds and brains that keeps them frozen, trapped in a place they desperately wish to escape? Why did the man's war not come to an end in February 1969 when his parents embraced him at Boston's Logan International Airport after his long flight back from Da Nang? Tom's need to live out his life as a memorial to his comrades taught me that he was suffering from a condition much more complex than simply having bad memories or damaged brain chemistry or altered fear circuits in the brain. Before the ambush in the rice paddy, Tom had been a devoted and loyal friend, someone who enjoyed life with many interests and pleasures. In one terrifying moment, trauma had transformed everything. During my time at the VA, I got to know many men who responded similarly. I have a hard time with that word for some reason. Faced with even minor frustrations, our veterans often flew instantly into extreme rages. The public areas of the clinic were pockmarked with the impacts of their fists on the drywall. Hey, Doc J. And security was kept constantly busy protecting claims agents and receptionists from enraged veterans. Of course, their behavior scared us, but I was also intrigued. At home, my wife and I were coping with similar problems in our toddlers, who regularly threw temper tantrums when told to eat their spinach or put on warm socks. Why was it then that I was utterly unconcerned about my kids' immature behavior, but deeply worried by what was going on with the vets, aside from their size, of course, which gave them the potential to inflict much more harm than my 2 footers at home? The reason was that I felt perfectly confident that with proper care, my kids would gradually learn to deal with frustrations and disappointments. But I was skeptical that I would be able to help my veterans require the skills of self control and self regulation that they had lost in the war. Unfortunately, nothing in my psychiatric training had prepared me to deal with any of the challenges that Tom and his fellow veterans presented. I went down to the medical library to look for books on war neuroses, shell shock, battle fatigue, or any other term or diagnosis I could think of that might shed light to my patients. To my surprise, the library at the VA didn't have a single book about any of those conditions. Wow, that's interesting. That's the 70s. Huh. 5 years after the last American soldier left Vietnam, the issue of wartime trauma was still not on anybody's agenda. Finally, in the Countway Library at Harvard Medical School, I discovered The Traumatic Neurosis of War, which had been published in 1941 by a psychiatrist named Abram Gardiner. It described Gardner's observations of World War I veterans and had been released in anticipation of the flood of shell-shocked soldiers experienced to the expected to be casualties of World War II. Gardner reported the same phenomena I was seeing. After the war, his patients were overtaken by a sense of futility. They became withdrawn and detached. Even if they had functioned well before, what Gardner called traumatic neuroses today, we call post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Gardner noted that sufferers from traumatic neurosis developed a chronic vigilance for and sensitivity to threat. His summation especially caught my eye. The nucleus of the neurosis is the physioneurosis. In other words, post traumatic stress isn't all in one's head, as some people supposed, but has a physiological basis. Gardner understood even that the symptoms have their origin in the entire body's response to the original trauma. Gardner's description corroborated my own observations, which was reassuring, but it provided me with little guidance on how to help the veterans. The lack of literature on this topic was a handicap, but my greater teacher, Elvin Simrad, had taught us to be skeptical about textbooks. We had only one real textbook, he said, our patients. That's interesting. We should trust only what we can learn from them and from our own experience. This sounds so simple, but even as Simrad pushed us to rely upon self knowledge, he also warned us how difficult the process really is, since human beings are experts in wishful thinking and obscuring the truth. I remember him saying, the greatest source of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. Working at the VA, I soon discovered how excruciating it can be to face reality. This was true both for my patients and for myself. Yeah, that's why a lot of people don't move on, right? Because the facing that reality of what you're experiencing, what you have experienced, what you are going through can be so overwhelming that you just cannot like take that next step to move out of it even though you realize it's not good for you. IBLP being the lie we tell ourselves. Right. We'll convince ourselves that all the stuff in IBLP was, you know, good for us because we wanted a better ending, right? And so, yeah, I agree. All of those beliefs were the lies we told ourselves to try and, have a better outcome. We don't really want to know what soldiers go through in combat. We do not really want to know how many children are being taken advantage of and abused in our own society, or how many couples, almost a third, as it turns out, engage in um, aggression at some point during their relationship. We want to think of families as safe havens in a heartless world, and of our own country as populated by enlightened, civilized people. We prefer to believe that cruelty occurs only in faraway places like Darfur or the Congo. It is hard enough for observers to bear witness to pain. It is any wonder, then, that the traumatized individuals themselves cannot tolerate remembering it, and they often resort to using um, rugs, adult beverages, and self harm to block out their unbearable knowledge. Tom and his fellow veterans became my first teachers in my quest to understand how lives are shattered by overwhelming experiences, and in figuring out how to enable them to feel fully alive again. Self medicating. Thank you. Trauma and the loss of self. The first study I did at the VA started with systemically asking veterans what had happened to them in Vietnam. I wanted to know what had pushed them over the brink, and why some had broken down as a result of that experience while others had been able to go on with their lives. Most of the men I interviewed had gone to war feeling well prepared, drawn close by the rigors of basic training and the shared danger. They exchanged pictures of their families and girlfriends. They put up with one another's flaws, and they were prepared to risk their lives for their friends. Most of them confided their dark secrets to a buddy, and some went as far as to share each other's shirts and socks. Many of the men had friendships similar to Tom's with Alex. Tom met Alex, an Italian guy from Malden, Massachusetts, on the first day in country, and they instantly became close friends. They drove their Jeep together, listened to the same music, and read each other's letters from home. They got inebriated together and chased the same Vietnamese bar girls. After about 3 months in country, Tom After about 3 months in country, Tom led his squad on a foot patrol through a rice paddy just before sunset. Suddenly, a hail of pew pew fire spurted from the green wall of the surrounding jungle, hitting the men around him one by one. Tom told me he had looked on in helpless horror as all the members of his platoon were unalived or wounded in a matter of seconds. He would never get one image out of his mind: the back of Alex's head as he lay face down in the rice paddy, his feet in the air. Tom wept as he recalled. He was the only real friend I ever had. Afterward, at night, Tom continued to hear the screams of his men and to see their bodies falling into the water. Any sounds, smells, or images that reminded him of the ambush, like the popping of firecrackers on the 4th of July, made him feel just as paralyzed, terrified, and enraged as he had the day the helicopter evacuated him from the rice paddy. Hey, Tyler. How are you doing? Good to see you. I am reading The Body Keeps the Score. Maybe even worse for Tom than the recurrent flashbacks of the ambush was the memory of what happened afterward. I could easily imagine how Tom's rage about his friend's unaliving had led to the calamity that followed. All right, cool. Yeah, It's been a while. We need to catch up. It took him months of dealing with his paralyzing shame before he could tell me about it. Since time immemorial, veterans like Achilles and Homer's Iliad have responded to the unaliving of their comrades with unspeakable acts of revenge. The day after the ambush, Tom went into a frenzy to a neighboring village, unaliving children, shooting, pew pewing an innocent farmer, TikTok shop, TikTok shop. We love the TikTok shop, all that kind of stuff. And forcing himself onto Vietnamese women. Wow. After that, it became truly impossible for him to go home again in any meaningful way. Yeah, that's a lot. How can you face your sweetheart and tell her that you brutally forced yourself upon a woman just like her? You were just at the TikTok shop. You love the heck out of it. Yeah, it's good. It's got some good stuff. um, how can you face your sweetheart and tell her that you brutally raped a woman just like her? Or watch your son take his first step when you are reminded of the child you forcefully took the life out of? Tom experienced the unaliving of Alex as a part of him, as if a part of himself had been forever destroyed. The part that was good and honorable and trustworthy. Trauma, whether it is a result of something done to you or something you yourself have done, almost always makes it difficult to engage in intimate relationships. After you have experienced something so unspeakable, how do you learn to trust yourself or anyone else again? Or conversely, how can you surrender to an intimate relationship after you have been brutally violated? That's a good point. Tom kept showing up faithfully for his appointments, as I had become for him a lifeline, the father he'd never had, an Alex who had survived the ambush. It takes enormous trust and courage to allow yourself to remember. One of the hardest things for traumatized people is to confront their shame about the way they behave during a traumatic episode, whether it is objectively warranted, as in the commission of atrocities, or not, as in the case of a child who tries to placate her abuser. One of the first people to write about this phenomenon was Sarah Haley, who occupied an office next to mine at the VA clinic. And in an article entitled When the Patient Reports Atrocities, which became a major impetus for the ultimate creation of the PTSD diagnosis, she discussed the well nigh intolerable difficulty of talking about and listening to the horrendous acts that are often committed by soldiers in the course of their war experiences. Hello, welcome in. Thank you for the follow. I am currently reading The Body Keeps the Score. You are welcome to hang out and talk about it. Hey, Kit. Good to see you. um, It's hard enough to face the suffering that has been inflicted by others, but deep down, many traumatized people are even more haunted by the shame they feel about what they themselves did or did not do under the circumstances. They despise themselves for how terrified, dependent, excited, or enraged they felt. In later years, I encountered a similar phenomenon in victims of child abuse. Most of them suffer from agonizing shame about the actions they took to survive and maintain a connection with the person who abused them. This was particularly true if the abuser was someone close to the child, someone the child depended on, as is often the case. The result can be confusion about whether one was a victim or a willing participant. which in turn leads to bewilderment about the difference between love and terror, pain and pleasure. We will return to this dilemma throughout the book. Numbing. Maybe the worst of Tom's symptoms was that he felt emotionally numb. He desperately wanted to love his family, but he just couldn't evoke any deep feelings for them. He felt emotionally distant from everybody, as though his heart were frozen and he were living behind a glass wall. That numbness extended to himself as well. He could not really feel anything except for his momentary rages and his shame. He described how he hardly recognized himself when he looked in the mirror to shave. When he heard himself arguing a case in court, he would observe himself from a distance and wonder how this guy, who happened to look and talk like him, was able to make such cogent arguments. When he won a case, he pretended to be gratified, and when he lost, it was as though he had seen it coming and was resigned to the defeat even before it happened. Despite the fact that he was a very effective lawyer, he always felt as though he were floating in space, lacking any sense of purpose or direction. That's intense. The only thing that occasionally relieved this feeling of aimlessness was intense involvement in a particular case. During the course of our treatment, Tom had to defend a mobster on forceful unaliving charges. For the duration of that trial, he was totally absorbed in devising a strategy for winning the case, and there were many occasions on which he stayed up all night to immerse himself in something that actually excited him. It was like being in combat, he said. He felt fully alive, and nothing else mattered. The moment Tom won that case, however, he lost his energy and sense of purpose. The nightmares returned, as did his rage attacks, so intensely that he had to move into a motel to ensure that he would not harm his wife or children. But being alone, too, was terrifying because the demons of the war returned in full force. Tom tried to stay busy, working, adult beveraging, and adult self medicating, doing anything to avoid confronting his demons. He kept thumbing through Soldier of Fortune, fantasizing about enlisting as a mercenary in one of the many regional wars. Yeah. Hold on, I gotta match shapes here real quick. Okay. I'm a person. Let's see. Enlisting as a mercenary in one of the many regional wars then raging in Africa. That spring, he took out his Harley and roared up the Kankamungus Highway in New Hampshire. The vibration, speed, and danger of that ride helped him pull himself back together to the point that he was able to leave his motel room and return to his family. It's almost like the adrenaline rush is almost like a way to get the tension out. And that kind of makes sense to me in a way. The reorganization of perception. Another study I conducted at the VA started out as research about nightmares, but ended up exploring how trauma changes people's perception and imagination. Bill, a former medic who had seen heavy action in Vietnam a decade earlier, was the first person enrolled in my nightmare study. After his discharge, he had enrolled in a theological seminary and had been assigned to his first parish in a congregational church in a Boston suburb. He was doing fine until he and his wife had the first child. Soon after the baby's birth, his wife, a nurse, had gone back to work while he remained at home, working on his weekly sermon and other parish duties and taking care of their newborn. On the very first day he was left alone with the baby, it began to cry, and he found himself suddenly flooded with unbearable images of unalived children in Vietnam, or unaliving at that time children in Vietnam. Bill had to call his wife to take over childcare and come to a VA, came to the VA in a panic. He described how he kept hearing the sounds of babies crying and seeing images of um so if you have a fire and the red stuff that comes out when you get hurt. So children that were in fire and also had red stuff on their faces. Okay. My medical colleagues thought that he must surely be psychotic because the textbooks of the time said that auditory and visual hallucinations were symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. The same text that provided this diagnosis also supplied a cause. Bill's psychosis was probably triggered by his feelings displaced in his wife's affections by their new baby. As I arrived at the intake office that day, I saw Bill surrounded by worried doctors who were prepared to inject him with a powerful antipsychotic drug and ship him off to a locked ward. They described his symptoms and asked my opinion. Having worked in a previous job on a ward specializing in the treatment of schizophrenics, I was intrigued. Something about the diagnosis didn't sound right. I asked Bill if I could talk with him, and after hearing his story, I unwittingly paraphrased something Sigmund Freud had said about trauma in 1895. I think this man is suffering from memories. I told Bill that I would try to help him, and after offering him some medication to control his panic, asked if he would be willing to come back a few days later to participate in my nightmare study. He agreed. As part of that study, we gave our participants a Rorschach's test. Unlike tests that require answers to straightforward questions, responses to the Rorschach are almost impossible to fake. The Rorschach provides us with I have no idea if I am um, thermal event leaking. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the assistance there, honey. Um, No, they did not say that the child could be a willing participant. They said that the confusion of when they leave that environment, of how the trauma affected them because they had to placate to their abuser, can blurry the lines between how they feel like they may have been a willing participant versus um you know, it being done to them, right? So, um, he was just describing something that they wrestle with. I don't know if you're like behind or yeah. So, okay, so where was I? The Rorschach provides us with a unique way to observe how people construct a mental image from what is basically a meaningless stimulus, a block, a blot of ink. The ink blot test. Gotcha. Because humans are meaning making creatures, we have a tendency to create some sort of image or story out of those ink blots, just as we do when we lie in a meadow on a beautiful summer day and see images in the clouds floating high above. What people make out of those blots can tell us a lot about how their mind works. On seeing the second card of the Rorschach's test, Bill exclaimed in horror. That is that child that I saw being forcefully dismembered up in Vietnam. Kind of interesting having to describe some of these things. In the middle, you see the um, thermally affected flesh, the wounds, and the leaking of red things spurting all over. Panting and with sweat beading on his forehead, he was in a panic similar to the one that that had initially brought him into the VA clinic. Although I heard veterans describing their flashback, this was the first time I actually witnessed one. In that very moment in my office, Bill was obviously seeing the same images, smelling the same smells, and feeling the same physical sensations that he felt during the original event. 10 years after helplessly holding the unaliving actively baby in his arms, Bill was reliving the trauma in response to an ink blot. Experiencing Bill's flashback firsthand in my office helped me realize that agony that regularly visited the veterans I was trying to treat and helped me appreciate how critical it was to find a solution. Expiring. Thank you. You're so helpful with words, honey. Um, the traumatic event itself, however horrendous, had a beginning, a middle, and an end, but I now saw that flashbacks could be even worse. You never know when you will be assaulted by them again, and you have no way of telling when they will stop. It took me years to learn how to effectively treat flashbacks, and in this process, Bill turned out to be one of my most important mentors. When we gave the Rorschach's test to 21 additional veterans, the response was consistent. 16 of them, on seeing the second card, reacted as if they were experiencing a wartime trauma. The second Rorschach's card is the first card that contains color and often elicits so called color shock in response. The veterans interpreted this card with descriptions like, "These are the innards of my friend Jim after a mortar shell um, came in contact with him and threw him in an open fashion." And this is the neck of my friend Danny after his head was forcefully removed by a shell while we were eating lunch. Whew. None of them mentioned dancing monks, fluttering butterflies, men on motorcycles, or any of the other ordinary, sometimes whimsical images that most people see. While the majority of the veterans were greatly upset by what they saw, the reactions of the remaining five were even more alarming. They simply went blank. "This is nothing," one observed, "just a bunch of ink." They were right, of course, but the normal human response to ambiguous stimuli is to use our imagination to read something into them. We learned from the Rorschach's test that traumatized people have a tendency to superimpose their trauma on everything around them and have trouble deciphering whatever is going on around them. There appeared to be little in between. That's interesting. We also learned that trauma affects the imagination. The five men who saw nothing in the blots had lost the capacity to let their minds play, but so too had the other 16 men. For in viewing scenes from the past in those blots, they were not displaying the mental flexibility that is hallmark of imagination. They simply kept replaying an old reel. Imagination is absolutely critical to the quality of our lives. Our imagination enables us to leave our routine everyday existence by fantasizing about travel, food, intimacy, falling in love, or having the last word. All the things that make life interesting. Imagination gives us the opportunity to envision new possibilities. It is an essential launching pad for making our hopes come true. See, honey, there's nothing wrong with me and all of my ideas. It's crucial. The book says so. Oh, It fires our creativity, relieves our boredom, alleviates our pain, enhances our pleasures, and enriches our most intimate relationships. See, I'm just trying to make things more enhanced in our relationship when I come up with crazy ideas. Except for when we live in limerence imagination. Oh, it was far behind. Thanks for clarifying. Have I ever said other? No, you just look at me like, oh God, now what? Uh, let's see. When people are compulsively and constantly pulled back into the past to the last time they felt intense involvement in deep emotions, they suffer from a failure of imagination, a loss of mental flexibility. Without imagination, there is no hope, no chance to envision a better future, no place to go, no goal to reach. The Rorschach's test also taught us that traumatized people look at the world in a fundamentally different way from other people. For most of us, a man coming down the street is just someone taking a walk. A grape victim, however, may see a person who is about to um, impose themselves upon her and go into a panic. A stern school teacher may be an intimidating presence to an average kid, but for a child whose stepfather forcefully disciplines him repetitively, she may represent a torturer and precipitate a rage attack or a terrified cowering in the corner. Or a terrified cowering in the corner. Oh, yeah. Ugh. Mm, yeah. Get little tidbits of the inside of our lives when my husband joins us in the chat. Oh man. All right. It is 9 o'clock. I have had a couple of really like hard days the past couple of days. So I think I am definitely gonna call it a night. And we will pick up next week with more of when the body keeps the score, not when. I don't know why I thought it said win for a second, but yeah, for more of the body keeps the score. Oh, absolutely, Panda. I appreciate you being here and hanging out and chatting, and Phantom and my hubby and Kit and David was here. I don't know if he's still here. So I appreciate y'all coming tonight and hanging out with me while we read this book. And I thought it wasn't going to be heavy. And I don't know why I would have ever thought that a book about trauma wouldn't be heavy, but we I do have a Facebook, but I am streaming on TikTok and YouTube simultaneously right now. And the lives do stay up on Facebook, I mean on YouTube. Mm. So if you want to trauma might be traumatizing. No, not at all. So if you want to catch up on what you might have missed tonight, you can go to the YouTubes and check it out. What is IFB Cult? Independent Fundamentalist Baptist Church. It is a denomination, I guess, almost. But every church is independent, so there's no like governing body. So, and then IBLP is the cult that the Duggars were in. No, not like snakes. It's fundamentalism, Christian fundamental occult. Yes. So somebody on TikTok was asking what IFB cult is. The NIGB. What is the NIGB? Stick up their butts. Yeah. Like Christian nationalists religion. Oh, the new IFB. Oh, those people are like I don't even know how to describe them. It's almost like charismatic fundamentalist with a sprinkling of witchcraft, which they're like so against the whole witchcraft thing, but it's almost like they participate it. Fanatical. Yeah, fanatical would be, I mean, a lot of the IFBers are fanatical, but the NIFB is like the Cirque du Soleil of performances and crazy stunts. Oh, that's a good way to say it. All the worst parts of the IFB turned up to 11. Yes. I call it all Kool-Aid, just different flavors. So, especially when you're talking like IFB and IBLP, there's so many parallels to those teachings. Um, I would just say like Bill Gothard was more of the quiet, creepy leader, and IFB leaders are more like bold in your face, screaming preachers, hellfire and brimstone. Oh, that is more culty. Just different branches of the same tree. Yeah. So, um, all right, guys. Well, I'm gonna shut this down. Again, I appreciate y'all being here. Uh, join us next Thursday at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time, PM. We will continue with the Body Keeps Score. And if somebody has not told you today or ever, I am proud of you.